Hey guys, it's me, YouTube, and today I want to talk about one of my favorite directors, Paul Thomas Anderson. PTA has been making some of the most unique and exciting films for years now, and with the release of Licorice Pizza, I thought it would be fun to rank and review all his films. And before we get into it, I just wanted to say that this is just my own opinion, so don't get mad if our rankings are different, it's just a list. And also, I think all his movies are great. I just thought it would be fun to do a list like this. And opinions of movies change all the time, especially with a director like this. So even though my list is this right now, it could easily change just as fast because they're all so great. So without further ado, let's get into it. It probably comes as no surprise that Hard Eight comes in last on this list. It's by no means a bad movie, but by comparison to everything he's made since then, I'd say it's the least interesting thematically and stylistically. The film also dealt with a lot of issues during and after production, which Anderson has discussed before, including the original name of the film being Sydney and him being forced to change it. One thing I will say about it though, is that you can see a lot of his early stylistic choices that would go on to define him later on. I'd also recommend watching the short film that got this funded, Cigarettes and Coffee, on YouTube. The quality on YouTube isn't great, but it's a really fun short film. Okay, so this might be the first controversial pick on the list, and again, I want to say this is not a bad movie by any means. I enjoy this movie, but I just enjoy his other films a bit more. I was pretty young when I first saw Magnolia, and I really loved it the first time. I loved how much energy and life was in the film and how it was just drenched with emotion. But on my most recent rewatch, I guess I just didn't connect to it the same way I used to. The 3-hour runtime can be a bit much, and while it's a film about how we're all connected, I didn't find the climax of everyone coming together as satisfying as I once remembered. I also think William H. Macy's character should have been cut entirely from the movie. I think removing him would have improved it significantly. I just think he really doesn't add much of anything to the story. There is a lot to enjoy though, especially the performances. I mean, everyone is killing it on this one. My favorite performances are probably Tom Cruise as Frank T.J. Mackey, John C. Reilly as Officer Jim, and Melora Walters as Claudia. I found their storylines to be the most engaging, and Cruise's monologue at the end of the film is heartbreaking. Also, the music by Amy Mann is fantastic. In terms of style, I enjoy the energy and pace of it, but I feel like PTA is still shedding some of his influences off here. You can feel how much Scorsese and Altman have influenced him on this one. All the push-ins and whip pans. This is purely a preference thing, but I think as he's gotten older, PTA's style has gotten better and better. Though I will say, you can feel how much passion is in the film, and it really wears its heart on its sleeve. I think it's rare these days for a film to be so open with its emotions like Magnolia is, and I think it's something to be appreciated. Okay, yes, again, controversial take. I know a lot of people say this is his best film, and I can't blame them. There's a lot to love about this movie. The use of color is amazing. The score by John Brion, fantastic. PTA directed this movie really well. Sandler and Watson both give outstanding performances, and I think the romance is really sweet. But there's just something about it that doesn't connect with me on a story level. Maybe it's the anxiety-inducing tone in the first half, but it just doesn't click for me like I want it to. I will say though that one thing I think this film does so well that we don't see a lot of in other movies is the idea that love can make you stronger. So often we see characters looking for someone to complete them, but not in the way it's portrayed here. We're shown how Sandler physically and emotionally gets stronger through finding love, and I think that's really lovely. This is probably PTA's most controversial movie, and that makes sense. It is only filmed to be a full adaptation of a book, and that book he's adapting is pretty dense. I even tried to read it before the film came out, and I couldn't finish it. But I think Pynchon's book and PTA's style go together pretty well. I will say I was a little disappointed the first time I saw this movie, but I was expecting a very different movie entirely. On rewatch, I let the movie take over and enjoy it for what it was, and I found myself having a great time. There's just something so magical and gripping about it. The airy and hazy quality is transfixing, and I'm a sucker for the romantic vibes of the 60s. Joaquin Phoenix is also perfect for this role and guides us through this bizarre story with such ease. The whole cast is great too, but I especially loved Katherine Waterston as Shasta. She has such a hypnotic energy to her here, and every scene she was in captivated me. It's also a pretty funny movie. It's by no means perfect though, and if I'm being honest, it's still pretty confusing to me. But I realize the point isn't really to get it, it's to sit back and enjoy the ride, and if you can get on this film's level, I think it's pretty fun. Here we are, at PTA's newest film. I was lucky enough to catch a screening of it in Brooklyn at the Alamo Drafthouse on 70mm, and it was a blast. Licorice Pizza is PTA's lightest, funniest, and most accessible movie he's ever made. It's just good vibes, a hangout movie at the highest level. I think it shares a lot of DNA with Inherent Vice and Boogie Nights, but it's also very different. It has this refreshing new quality to it. I think in part because most of the cast is newcomers, and partially because it's really just a slice-of-life film. But even then, PTA can't help but inject this thing with so much care and emotion. There's just so much to love about it. Cooper Hoffman and Alana Haim were both great and deserve a lot of praise, but the standout for me was Bradley Cooper in a much too short role as John Peters. I could not stop laughing whenever he was on screen. The soundtrack is also fantastic. I'd say my only real complaint would be the structure of the film at times. It almost feels like a collection of moments or shorts within a larger story. Each time one ended, we'd move on to a new one, and that previous story wouldn't really matter anymore. I guess I wish there was a bit more of a narrative connection between some of the events. I know that's a weird ask for a hangout movie, but there was a few story beats in the film I thought would return and never did. I also found a few random moments to feel a bit out of place or a little unnecessary, but it's nothing that took away from the film. Overall, I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to go rewatch it again, as with most of PTA's movies. I'm excited for it to come out wide release and everyone to see it because I think it's going to be a real crowd pleaser. Alright, this movie is so much fun. The camera movements, the music, the acting, the story, it has everything going for it. Right up there with Licorice Pizza as his most fun and accessible movie, even though it's about porn. I think this was the first movie of his I ever saw, and it's a blast and so easily rewatchable. I love how every character gets a moment to shine, even if it's brief. It makes the world we're visiting feel much more lived in. The reason it falls a little lower on my list is that I don't love the second half of the movie as much as the first. It's a very simple rise and fall story, and I just don't think the fall is as great as the rise. And I think the movie gets a little unfocused during some of that time. It eventually finds its footing at the end though, with one of the most iconic endings ever. PTA also really wears his influences on his sleeve here, and while I think he does a great job with it, I tend to like his later films stylistically a bit more. Boy, do I love this movie. It was actually the first movie of his I got to see in theaters, and I remember being so excited. Only PTA can make a period piece about a grumpy dressmaker so exciting. Easily one of his best movies. There's just an aura to this film that's so beautiful, I think in part to Johnny Greenwood's stunning score, that to me feels like a character in itself. It's such a simple film, but the details and nuances really add up to creating such a wonderfully rich portrait of this couple at odds with one another. Of course, Daniel Day-Lewis is great, but Vicky Krebs really goes toe-to-toe with him here. Such fully realized characters. Also, I think something that's not always talked about is how great the sound design is here. The scenes at the dinner table where you can see Reynolds Woodcock just totally freak out over the sounds of Alma eating are just fantastic. And here PTA puts so much of himself into Reynolds, a temperamental and obsessive artist who can only be tempered by a woman of equal strength. And the way they play off each other here is so fun to watch. And see the way Alma's character arc creeps up on the viewer is so exciting. And again, it's a surprisingly funny movie. PTA is very underrated in terms of humor. He seems to be a pretty funny guy. There's so many fun little twists in this movie, and I won't get into them, but if you haven't seen this movie, please go and watch it. What else is there to say about There Will Be Blood at this point? Essentially perfect movie, and there's about 1 million video essays dissecting every pixel of this thing. For a nearly 3-hour western, it's shocking how entertaining nearly every single second of this thing is. And obviously Daniel Day-Lewis as Daniel Plainview is one of the most iconic anti-heroes ever. It's just so well made, but the thing I always take away from it is its simplicity. This is really when PTA's style transitioned over, and I think we're all better off for it. In terms of style, it's not flashy or in your face at all. It's just so effective and knows what it's doing at all times. The more you break this film down, the more you realize PTA is just doing everything right. The camera is always in the right place, and the actor is always doing exactly what they have to do. And an all-time classic ending. I can watch that scene over and over again. If there's any reason this is number 2 and not number 1, maybe it's because I've seen this film so many times and it's been talked about to death that I just don't get as much out of it as the first film on this list, but of course it's still amazing, and it makes sense why so many people call this his best film. The Master being number 1 may come as a shock to some, maybe not to others. I know for sure it's a polarizing movie. I was a little too young when the film came out to really understand the discourse around it at the time, but I know it was mixed to say the least, with many people being confused by it. And honestly, I get it. I'll be honest, the first time I saw this movie, I didn't like it all that much. I didn't get it and I found it to be pretty confusing. But there was just something about it that I couldn't shake off. There was this lingering feeling. It was the sounds, the colors of it that I just wanted to go back and revisit. Eventually, I rewatched it, then rewatched it again, and I soon found myself coming back to this movie every few months. PTA's movies seem to have that lingering effect. They leave you wanting more, and I think there's no better example of this than The Master. And after all these years, I think it's not only my favorite film of his, but one of my favorite films ever. It's maybe my favorite looking film of PTA's. The colors are so bright and vibrant, and the way the camera moves so effortlessly always amazes me. And for all the great performances that PTA has directed over the years, I don't think there's a better two than Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman here. Maybe 2 of my favorite performances of all time. I can't think of another movie where 2 leading men are both this good. I can rewatch the processing scene endlessly. A lot of talk when this film came out was how it was supposed to be about Scientology, but really wasn't, and I think this film only seems to be about Scientology on a basic level, because it's really a story of one man searching for a purpose and another for stability, this immovable force and unstoppable object colliding into each other. And I really appreciate how PTA writes Lancaster Dodd not as a con man, but as a lost soul who genuinely believes what he's teaching, or at the very least wants to believe it to his very core, because more than anyone, he's scared. Scared about what his purpose in life is, what the purpose of life is, and if there's really a higher power. And Freddy is such a brilliant portrayal of a damaged and lost man after the war. And the film's themes really come together, and that speech that Hoffman gives at the end about finding a master, and how deep down we all need one. And it's funny how it's really a love story between these 2 men, not on a romantic level, but on a human level, and that relationship is portrayed so beautifully here. There's so much I can gush over with this film. I think it's endlessly fascinating and his most fun film to dissect. Every time I watch it, I pick up on something new. I also think in terms of style, this film feels entirely all its own. Even though PTA has his own distinct style, you can see some of his influences in his other films, like Hitchcock with Phantom Thread, Orson Welles with There Will Be Blood, or Scorsese with Boogie Nights. But with The Master, it feels entirely his own, a fully original and singular vision. It's weird and bizarre for sure, but I think it's PTA's most visually and thematically rich film, and I can't wait to watch it over and over and over again. Thanks for watching my video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, I just wanted to say this is just my opinion. If yours is completely different, then that's cool too. Let me know what you thought of the video in the comments below, and leave your ranking of PTA's films. I'd like to see what you guys think. And if you like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you can like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. And if you want to follow me anywhere, I'll leave my handles in the comments below. Thanks, guys.